All right. Well, we're in week 3 of Faith to Follow of our Faith Explored series with the title Faith to Follow. And, this is the cornerstone of our Christian walk is faith, and we've talked about this for the past 2 weeks and now again today. And, the point of this week is that if you want to see God's power, we have to be willing to step out in faith. And that looks all in different ways, from a simple daily decision to something bigger, to a big decision, a job change, whatever that is. We look at that and we say, okay, so we know about faith. And we've used simple examples like you walk out of the church, you have faith the sidewalk will be there and not a cliff. There wasn't some random sinkhole that just formed outside of the building. And then you have faith that your car is going to start. We have faith that there'll be dinner on the table tonight. There's a lot of things that are, it can be big, but it's also just called simple faith. Then there's the bigger things of faith. Okay, we're going on a trip here to serve the people there. And it's like, oh, I'm not sure about that. That was something that teenagers would often confront every summer was the big missions trip. And I remember one time I went to Monterrey, Mexico with my youth group. And it was an interesting trip because it was actually wasn't an AIMS trip, which just stands for Ambassadors and Missions through the Assemblies of God. It was a MAPS trip, which is more geared for adults, but it was you're going to build. And yet our youth group got looped into that. And we went with some other guys, Dave Gall, and what really made the trip, you guys will understand, Bill Engel. He was there, and it was just an interesting trip. But it took faith. Like 17 years old, where you can get $600-700 to go. And so I took a step of faith and signed up and sent out the little cards. And there was a person in our church that perhaps Don might know. His name was Ralph Nabeck. And Ralph came up to me after service. He was a mortician, worked in a funeral home. And he came up to me, he goes, I'm so proud of what you're, and he knew my mom since she was a little girl too. So it tells you a little bit about Ralph's age. And he goes, just want to let you know, I just put $600 into your account for your trip. You're going. And it was just like, wow, it took a step of faith. And there it was. Mr. Nabeck, he drove the big silver Cadillac Eldorado, that 80s model where it was like a huge boat coming into the church parking lot. And it was just a cool thing. And so I want to point out this morning that when we have faith to follow, some awesome things happen because God has a plan for your life. At every stage of life, God has a plan for you. I was listening to an interesting radio show this week, and one person said, yeah, I'm dealing with the whole I'm hitting 60 thing, and I'm just wondering if I'm going to coast now, and a lot of us in this room, you're like 60, not a big deal. But this is what the person was dealing with, and some people deal with that coming up to certain milestones in their life, like, am I going to just coast now, or should I take a step of faith to go to the next one? There's a story within the scriptures of God leading and guiding his people to new places, new tasks, and it always because God has an intention for those individual lives. He's got a plan for people's lives, and it was true in scripture. The truth is that God has done the same with you and me. He helps us to take that step of faith where we weren't created by accident, and God made us with a plan in mind, every one of us, for us to do something. The beginning of the Bible tells the story of a world that was created good and perfect, but eventually was marred by sin, and we know the whole story of how that goes. All of creation has spiraled out of control, and the author of the book by chapter 11 wants the reader to ask the question, and that is this: will God do anything to make things right once again and restore his creation? So to answer this question, we're going to jump to Genesis chapter 12 through a man called Abram, also known as Abraham. We sang about him in VBS, our father Abraham, and he had many sons. And it involved all of your left arm, right arm, all that stuff. So if you don't know that song, just Google it. I'm not singing it this morning. I'm too tired. But it says this: the Lord had said to Abram, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you, will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. So God spoke to Abram about the plan he had for his life. It was a big plan. It was a plan that God intended to use Abram and his family to bless the entire earth if Abram was willing to follow. And he was going to make Abram's name great. He was going to bless him. And why? For Abram's sake? No, it's always for God's sake. We know that. It's always for God as to why we do things. And so, should he choose to accept, the stakes are high. Faith comes with a cost. Taking a step of faith, doing something for God, it costs something. And here it was going to cost him something. It wouldn't be easy. And on top of that, there was no express destination. A lot of us would not be okay with that. Where are you going? I don't know. I've always thought it'd be fun to do one of those things where you just, if a husband and wife could get away for just a couple of days, just to go to the airport. I've seen it done in movies before. Go to the airport and say, I want the next plane out, and just pack like you're going away for a couple of days, and just find out. You just say, next plane out, I want tickets on it, and then you find out where you're going. Wouldn't that be fun? Some of you, absolutely not. I think it would be a hoot, just all of a sudden, hey, we're in Cleveland. Okay, let's do something, But this is the case with Abram. He didn't know where the destination was. We don't need to exercise trust if we know how the story ends, though. To pack a bag, go on a plane, and just find out, it's like, okay, yeah, we're gonna go here for the day or for a couple days. But when you get to the airport, you just say, well, next ticket out. Hey, we're talking either Cincinnati or France. Okay. It's we're not quite sure where we're going, but it's going to be a lot of fun. And maybe God wants you to take some kind of risk for him. Perhaps that's why I'm a little more jazzed about that stuff. My wife has told people over and over again, Bob's the type of guy that'll jump off a cliff and figure out how he's going to land later. Okay. That's me. I look at Abram's story. I'm like, dude, that's perfect. Okay. That he would just go for it. He was all in on it. And maybe God wants us to take some kind of risk for him. Either way, it's highly likely that if we're to be obedient to God's leading, you may be a blessing to someone or some place that you cannot see right now. And so God is always speaking to us about these steps of faith. And the question is, are we listening? In order to live a life of faith like Abram did, we have to train ourselves to hear the voice of God. That means shutting down a lot of things, a lot of noises in life to hear what God is speaking to you about. Sometimes we get inspired through a reading, through different music and stuff, but a lot of times it's just as good as Christian worship music and Christian music can be, shut it down. Shut down the reading to say, God, speak to me. I want to be open to what you have for me. Well, what does he sound like? How do I know if he's speaking to me? Throughout the Bible, God uses many and any means necessary to communicate to his people. He used the burning bush to speak to Moses about his plan to rescue his people. He used a donkey to speak to Absalom. He used an explosion in my case, just for me to be able to hear what God had for my life. And I told you I'll talk a little bit about how I got into ministry so you understand. I can give you an example of what a step of faith looks like. And so on the screen, I've showed this picture before, but this is the house that I was in that exploded in Mauston, Wisconsin. A little house in 1995. You can see, we could zoom in on it, you could see structurally it is not sound when that whole side of the house is bulging out, windows are boarded up and everything. But it was there that, somebody that I was interested in well before Tracy, a Christian girl from another church, Milwaukee, we got to know each other, and she made it clear to me, I don't want to be a youth pastor's wife. And so literally the day before we went up there in October, I told God in my prayer time, I said, I've met the right person. She's a Christian. I'm not going into full-time ministry. And I knew that's what he wanted me to do because I pursued it right after school, and it was confirmed over and over again. And it was during this moment that God gave me what I call my Jonah experience. So I went up to this house, went up to Mauston with my then girlfriend, and we hung out there for the day. We get in the house. Increasingly over the day, it was just like, man, something's not right here. And actually, looking back on it, I recall distinctly that I wasn't thinking clearly. But we continued to do what young couples do together. We carved pumpkins and we laughed and all that stuff. And so ultimately, though, that late afternoon, early evening, her father came up and her mother and with her cousins, and they came up to the farmhouse. And as any good AG couple does, AG family does, Assemblies Christian family. My room was right here. Her room was back here by mom and dad's room. Okay. It was just one of those things, because we were only dating. And what's interesting though is that night the hot water wasn't working, and so he went downstairs, the father, and noticed the LP was leaking really bad, and so he opened up or the propane, yeah, LP. He opened up the big doors on the side of the building here, right there, and got a fan going, aired it out, and everything, and all of that stuff. But my understanding is that's a heavy gas, and it sits low to the ground, and he didn't get it all out. And in his words, and he's upwards in the 80s now, when he lit the hot water heater, literally a ball of fire formed in front of him. And I'm not joking. I was sleeping, but I literally felt like a whoop in the house, and then boom, just blew. And he blew every beam out of the basement. And what you don't see is on the other side of that house, the wall's not even there. And my bedroom, I thought something big happened. I looked over and I could see the farm field where there wasn't a window before. And it was a big deal. And what's interesting to me is I went through all that and I said, God, the day before, God, I'm not going into ministry. I'm not doing it. This is what ultimately the house looked like inside. That's the kitchen area. Okay, the whole upstairs came down. I heard screaming. I thought my floor was on top of everybody else. And this is the other side of it here. That's what it looked like after it. And I took these pictures shortly before they actually tore the place down. But it was one of those moments that I literally came back from Boston. The father was in St. Mary's burn unit, 70% third-degree burns. And I decided to go back to work, and I couldn't hold it together. My brother saw me go into the restroom multiple times, just in tears. But the reason why I was in tears is because of that, but also the night we got back, we all stayed as a family. We didn't even sleep that night. And we got a call in the morning that we can come see Andreas at this point to visit him in the hospital. And I said, I'll drive. And, 51st and Center in Milwaukee, we go outside, my car is gone, stolen, right there. And it was one of those moments where I'm literally I had nothing left to offer. I was gone. And I went back to work, and that's when I was in tears, and my brother saw me, and I remember praying to God in the bathroom. I said, God, I know what you're doing here. I know what you're up to. I said, I realized that I asked for forgiveness. If you bring my car back and you bring this guy through these first couple days without any infection, I'm yours. I'm going into ministry. Literally, as soon as I walked out to the bathroom, my brother will remember this. Over the speaker, it said, Bob, call Park Line 1. Picked up the phone, Milwaukee Police Department, we found your car. And it looked like a crime scene, really, because the father that I put in the back seat to get him to the hospital, he was literally dripping skin and blood and everything. And so it's kind of funny. We always feel bad for the guy that stole the car. He probably is like, what happened in this car? So he probably just dumped it somewhere. But then I got a call a few minutes later saying, good report. The father doesn't have an infection that we see. And this is after rolling around in a sandbox to put the fire out. And so it was that moment where I instantly said, okay, God, you're getting my attention. You're speaking to me. I'm listening. You had to crack me upside the head with a 2x4 to get my attention, but here I am. I'm yours. And so in these situations, we see that God speaks to us in different ways. And I felt it's important for you to hear that, to know, how did Bob get into ministry? How did that happen? Elijah, he was an Old Testament prophet of God. He was used by God to do amazing things. At one point in his life, he had a showdown with the group of prophets of false god named Baal. We know the story. Whose God is bigger story. Though he was a hero, he fled to the wilderness to escape the retribution of the evil queen Jezebel. And it's there in the wilderness that Elijah heard God in a way that teaches us how to receive revelation from God and live with inspired faith. And it's 1 Kings chapter 19, 11 through 13. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. It's interesting that it is not until after the loud, grandiose, flashy things have passed that God finally speaks and comforts Elijah with his words. For me, it was opposite. It was the big, grandiose, boom sort of thing. But he speaks to us on our own terms. Maybe if our life is so chaotic, that's how God speaks to us, is through a whisper, because it's so different. If our life is calm, cool, and collected, maybe he's going to do something big. We don't know. We have to have the faith to follow, though. We live in a world that is always listening to the loudest and most demonstrative voice. And a monstrous voice, I would say. We live in a world that whoever's the loudest has the microphone. We've set the platform for everybody to have a voice through social networking. Anybody can have a band. Anybody can be a preacher. In a U2 interview back in, I think it was 94, probably 96 when Napster was getting going. Bono was introduced. He goes, do you think the modern, do you think he's basically, the interview through MTV said, what do you think is going to kill music? And he said, everyone having a voice. Basically, everybody can record. It's going to become so inundated that music's just going to fall apart. And it has. I mean, there are still some good artists, but so we live in a world that are always listening to the loudest and most pronounced voice. So we have to learn to decipher, God, what is your voice? I want to hear it. I want to know it. He brings peace in situations. But when we hear that voice, just like Abraham, what do we do with it? Well, here's the answer. We have to be willing to go. Wherever he's calling us to go, we have to be willing to do it. We have to be willing to talk. We have to be willing to reach out. It's what I had to do when I got to Radiant Fellowship. Many years after I started youth ministry in 96, February 96, at a little church in Milwaukee called Bayview Assembly of God. Everything was going well. Was there for 8 years. Church was about 70 people. Youth group was 85 with a college group of 25. So it was going very well. God's favor was on it. But what happened was we ended up buying a big building, one that I wasn't for. This is where I believe God will shut doors on our plans, but we can pick it. If we really want to, we can pick, and we can insert a Milwaukee joke in there somewhere. And that's what happened. It was picked. And here we are with 70 people with a $1.5 million mortgage. Not because any bank would fund us, but because the organization, the denomination that was selling it was willing to do it. With it came a lot of stresses and headaches and and conversations and falling into debt very rapidly. And as the youth pastor, I sat back saying, I'm going to hold my course. But what happened was the leaders at B at the time, they said, we want everything to happen on Wednesday nights. I said, well, we bought this new building. We don't even have a youth room. What do we do with that? And they said, make it work. That's what they said with my desk too. I got back from my first anniversary trip. They moved into this new building already. I said, I don't have a desk. Everybody else got new ones. They said, go find a card table. That was the beginning of the end for me. And so they said, you have to move it to Wednesday nights, or that's just how it's going to be. And that's a sports night in Milwaukee, in Cudahy, South Milwaukee area. And so our youth group within 2 weeks went from 85 plus college group to 12 kids. It deflated instantly. And I'm wondering why all the power trips, what's going on here? What's happening? Come to find out, the person I was serving under, the pastor I was serving under, ended up making some poor life choices. Church world calls it moral failing. And it was announced, and that was that. instantly I was brought in to a board meeting. Actually, just before that meeting where they told me we were going to Wednesday nights, that was the first time I was allowed to a board meeting in 8 years. And I remember speaking to the group, and they asked me questions, and I started replying. They said, "You will not talk until you're asked to." It was one of those moments like, okay, I see what's going on here. I didn't think this time would come. But then when the moral failing happened and everything, the church really started unraveling. My friend, my retired pastor friend, Joel Pavia, he walked with me. He knew all the stories that I just told you. And I said, he goes, "So what are you going to do now? What's your plan?" I said, "Well, I'm going to put my resume in. I wouldn't mind staying here. And I love Milwaukee. I'm the youth pastor." And Joel sat me down. He goes, "Bob," he took Tracy and I out for dinner at Perkins. And he goes, "Bob, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear." I said, "What's that?" He goes, "The board doesn't want you here. Pull your resume back." And it was at that moment I was just shattered. I was like, okay, here comes the resignation. And we pulled out. The board just made their decision. They wanted all the funds back to the office that the youth ministry made. They said, "What you raise is what you have." So we got involved with the Milwaukee Brewer concession, that we were rolling it in. It was a good time. But it was time to go. So we decided to head out, betrayed, hurt, kicked in the teeth, all of that. But the pastor that started this church was down there, and he said, "Hey, we're going to start a new thing. We'd love to have you up here." And we were praying about it. Wapaka, we were offered a place at Germantown Life Church, place in Olathe with my youth pastor. That was an easy no. We love each other, but we wouldn't work too well together. And so we decided to come up here. The district official came to the church, uninstalled him, and he invited us up here, and we were a part of it. This is a new church. They were just signed the papers for this building. At the time, it was about 120, 130,000. Just looked at the statement last week, and now we owe just under 35,000 on the place. Praise the Lord. But it was going well. Once again, youth group. If we just had the kids, about 10 kids, our outreach is at the Armory, dodgeball tournaments, all that stuff. It was when the dodgeball movie came out, so we did dodgeball tournaments. You can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. So we decided to do that. Our youth group gatherings were about 80 kids in this little city of Wapaka. And it was a great time. But then our leadership at this church made a poor decision legally down in Milwaukee and got caught. And during that time, it was the board and leadership said, "Bob, we want you to be interim pastor." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." We still maintain a good friendship with our former pastor. But then, unfortunately, things got ugly. There was a letter. The district pulled him from the position here and from his position over there. And it was sent out on our church letterhead that said, "Your interim pastor, youth pastor, has removed me from the church." Sent it out to the entire church body. Number one, I told my wife, I said, "If this is the case, I'm the world's most powerful youth pastor in the AG to remove the pastor of the church." But it was hurtful and it got ugly. It was terrible. My first Sunday here that we relaunched the church, was August 8th. There was 8 people here. That was it. And a couple of them just to watch how this thing was going to unravel. The person that was close personal friends with the pastor down in Milwaukee walked into this door right at service time. He goes, "Hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm here to introduce your new pastor. Here's Bob," and walked out the door again. I'm like, whoa. Tracy and I literally took ourselves out to lunch for our celebratory lunch, and I turned the receipt in. That was hey, here's our big Sunday. But it was one of those moments before that happened. My friend and district superintendent after Joel Pavia, Arden Adamson, he knew my story. He knows my aunt and uncle very well. He knows who I am. He goes, "Bob, I know you've been through a lot, but would you consider pastoring this church?" And this is before August. And I said things to Arden that no credential holder should ever say to Arden. But I was fried. I was done. I was ready to walk away from ministry and just say, and I told Arden exactly what I thought. Arden is a very mild-mannered, very distinguished gentleman. And he goes, I understand your frustration. Why don't you go home and pray about it? Like, and so I did. And Tracy and I felt good about it. And a lot of hurts came from it. But we decided, you know what? Let's do it again. We're going to step out in faith. We were willing to go to make a difference. And here we are, all these years later, still doing it. I share these stories because it's so good to hear biblical stories, but it's also good to hear something from someone within the family. You know, to say, if you follow God and he tells you to step out, it's going to work out. It may be uncomfortable, it may be something you don't want to do, but if you do it and you know it's God calling you, then you know what? Let's go. Let's do it. So we have to be willing to go. I'm reminded of the great missionary Hudson Taylor. He was a great man of faith who founded China Inland Mission. He was dedicated to integrating faith and risk. That was his thing. He said this, unless there's an element of risk in our exploits for God, there is no need for faith. And to be honest with you, when I came to that point being asked to take this church, I never applied for a ministry position before. And I took this, and it was one of those moments where it was like, God, this is a big step of faith because you know I'm ready to walk. I was raised in the picture perfect, stable church. Tracy was raised in what a stable church should look like. And here I am within a year and a half, back to back with 2 stories like this. One of the people on Focus on the Family, they came to our church during that time. And he goes, Bob, what you've been through in 2 years is more than a pastoral experience in a lifetime. Not all pastors, because there's a lot of stories like this out there, believe it or not, in ministry, a lot of hurtful stories. But it has to have an element of risk. Otherwise, we wouldn't take a step of faith. I didn't know where this would go with Radiant, but I was willing to take a step of faith. In fact, this was our first logo that they paid almost $1,500 for. Okay, I was not in on that decision. This is the old cafe in the building over there in that corner. That's why the TV, big tube TV was up there and stuff. And we've seen a lot of good things happen at this church, a lot of outreach. A lot of people in the city ask, where's Radiant? They know where it is. We're the church that gives. That's, just last night I was doing a wedding and people, when I said I'm Pastor Bob from Radiant Fellowship, a few people automatically said, we know that church. It's because you guys make it a great place. It's because we serve. And so I wrote down, may we accept the invitation from God to risk for the sake of the gospel. Taking a step of faith to do something is not easy. I get it. You heard 2 of my big stories. I get it. But I would just encourage us that we must work up the courage and obedience to go wherever he leads us, whatever he wants us to do. My staff at Foundations for Living is finding this out to be true about me. I'm willing to go for it. Val knows that. We're doing some awesome things over there, which will be revealed in the next few weeks. But we got to go. It's got to have an element of fear. It's got to have an element of just wanting to do something, the unknown. But what's God calling you to do?